Put your hands up, yeah. To the floor, yeah. Yeah.
That's right.
Come down, selector.
That's right. Come on.
Hey, we want to welcome everyone to another episode of You and the Law Podcast Show. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, Virgil Green, and as always, the dude sits next to the right of me goes by the name of Chief Swaggy One.
Dude, you haven't earned that right to do that, man. Just say Chief Swaggy One and let's move forward, man.
You know, man, I'm just trying to put a little swag.
You don't have it. You don't have it. You're from Hobbs, New Mexico. You don't have swag.
Man, people from Hobbs, New Mexico got the swag.
Nah.
We got the swag.
Man, just go ahead on so we can start. So hey, listen. Listen.
People from South Oak Cliff, they ain't got the swag.
Okay, now, so you're gonna mess around and you're gonna get inboxed from a lot of people from South Oak Cliff, man. It's gonna get you, man. But
well, you know what? If we got a lot of people on here listening from South Oak Cliff, thank you for tuning in and joining us, because the man that you know who goes by the name of Chief Swaggy One, let me know what kind of swag he got. Let us know. Everybody in podcast land wants to know what kind of swag this brother got.
a lot.
Okay.
A lot.
Hey, brother, we got another informative topic that we're going to be talking about tonight, and hopefully everybody will tune in and be a part of the conversation with us. We want to remind those you can, as you're listening live, watching us on Facebook Live or LinkedIn Live, you can leave your comments in the chat room, and we will definitely get to your comments, and hopefully you will have some comments related to what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Hey, Virgil.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to say something to Henry. Henry, you probably do have swag. I'm referring to this guy that's my co-host. There is no way. No, but I believe that's swag, Henry. Thank you, man.
Well, you know, Henry is a Hobbs Eagle.
Okay.
There is a lot of pride being a Hobbs Eagle. And Hobbs, as I said, brother, we got swag.
Okay.
We got the swag.
All right.
See, you thought somebody from South Oak Cliff was going to have your back, but I got somebody from Hobbs, New Mexico.
Okay.
Who's
all right, Henry, appreciate it. I know you got swag, man.
Appreciate it, Henry. Hey, so we're going to be talking about something that a lot of police departments have been looking into over the last couple of years, and probably more so after the death of George Floyd and some of the other deaths related to people with mental health illness, where many agencies are looking at alternative responses to responding to nonviolent 911 calls. So, Keith, this is something you and we've talked about in the past, and it has, unfortunately, people have lost their lives behind something that probably should have been ahead of well before 2023.
Yeah, I think Virgil, I was having a discussion with at the time one of my executive command staff members. We were talking about this same exact topic, and it came about that we were trying to determine what could we not respond to versus what did we have to respond to. And unfortunately, I think that the majority of the time we have to respond because the person who calls 911 expects police service. However, I think that our first responders, and I want the listeners to understand that I believe that communication professionals are also first responders. That's where it starts. That's who it starts with. And so I believe that we have to train, they have to have the training. And I know one particular communication center that the new director is going in this direction as far as making sure that each and every call that comes in, all the appropriate questions are asked to determine what resources need to be. But you're absolutely right. I think on that front end, we can ask the questions to determine what responses are required. However, we know that can change at any moment. We know that it can go from this simple call to a exigent call, and so you have to have the right responses in order to be handled that. But there are those calls that we know that can't have alternate responses provided.
Yeah, Keith, and I think, as we talked about before, a lot of things happen on the front end of these 911 calls where dispatchers are, trained to decide if this is a call for police or if this is a call for fire or if this is a call for, paramedics to respond to the call. And I think one of the things that you're starting to see a lot more of the larger dispatch communication centers implement is to have a embedded social worker who are trained to deal with mental health calls, and those calls are quickly routed to those embedded social workers who now you're talking to somebody who obviously has a different set of skills who can, be able to send a co-response team to deal with the mental health call. But also, Keith, one of the things that we'll be talking about throughout the podcast show, it's not so much just mental health calls that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about calls, accidents are non-violent calls. But sometimes those accidents can turn into something physical. You may have a shoplifting call, so there's a lot of different type of calls that are nonviolent calls, but police are dispatched to those calls. And one of them is something that we're going to end up talking about here in just a little bit, where it's a disturbing video to see how this elderly man was treated by these police officers.
Well, Ver, I will tell you there's a police department in California called Chula Vista, and
Chula Vista
has really been the setting the trend for technology. And what they're doing now is they're actually sending drones out ahead of the calls for service to determine what resources, or if any, are needed in an exigent circumstance. Which I think that's amazing for that to occur. But I came from agencies that had alternate responses to service calls. Case in point, when I was in Arlington, we had what's called police service assistants, and they took all the minor accidents, and they also took the residential burglary reports and car burglary reports where the suspect was not on scene. So I know that it works. You are starting to see these social worker teams or alternative response teams respond to these calls involving individuals that have mental illness and also our unsheltered population, just based on the questions that the dispatchers are asking. Then they're able to provide that, and that's been good. But I don't think all the time you can send a civilian social worker out to an incident alone. And so I think that I like the way they have combined the teams of a mental health professional, a law enforcement officer to go out, or maybe two law enforcement officers or two, and to go out to a scene that involves someone who may be in crisis. I like that. It's just what I tell people is sometimes you just don't know what's on the other end. So I think you have to provide that law enforcement response and connection with the social services aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, so Keith, with the agency where I'm at now, we have what's community service officers. Those community service officers respond to nonviolent calls, whether it be something related to an animal welfare call or something related to, say, somebody, locked their keys in their car, or it may be, a burglary that occurred, and there's, like you mentioned, there's no immediate threat to the homeowner. So you've got somebody who is in a uniform but not a sworn police officer who are taking these reports. So that's a different co-response versus sending, a uniform officer there, which ties up that officer. So, Keith, again, just touching back on some of the things that have happened, and there's probably a lot of agencies that have had these alternative responses or co-responses in their within their police department for quite some time, and that's probably why you don't hear uh, about these agencies having these types of incidents happen with their police officers.
Well, I think it's a paradigm shift. As a matter of fact, I know it is, and especially chiefs are chiefs are becoming more creative or having to become more creative because we have so many vacancies in the profession. As you know, we're having
Yeah.
difficulty with recruiting and retention throughout the nation.
Hmm.
We're having to become more creative and determined. And then the other thing is, Virgil, what calls do we just not respond to? You're
Yeah.
starting to see
Well,
more departments not responding to residential alarms, with the exception of if someone has their alarm is registered.
yeah.
And so you're starting to see those type of things, or pushing those calls toward online reporting.
Yeah, yeah, and even some non-injury accidents, where citizens can exchange
They're just
information.
not responding.
Uh,
That's yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So, and Keith, you mentioned what Chula Vista is doing with their drone program. Was at ICP conference this past year, and there was an agency there that did a presentation that was right outside of Atlanta, and they're doing the same thing. And actually, they actually went to Chula Vista and was there to see how their drone pilot program worked, because it is a great program to utilize that technology to assist officers, and it also give officers, where they're able to visually see what's going on as they're responding to the call, and that drone pilot operator may determine that there's no need for them uh, to respond, or it may not be a need for more than 2 or 3 units to respond to that type of a
Yeah, I
call.
think the worst thing we could do, and our communications professionals do an amazing job, but I really think that the worst thing we could do is put that pressure on them to make that decision on whether or not an officer responds. I think that you provide that information, all the information up to the officer and the supervisor, and they make that decision. But we're putting our communications experts into a bad situation by having them to determine that's major liability. It puts a lot of pressure on them, and so I just think we have to just determine on what we're going to do. And there's some departments that are so understaffed they just don't. If you ever talk to anybody, a resident from Dallas, they will tell you
Oh
that,
yeah,
man,
yeah,
they're waiting some calls 5, 6, 7 hours, even to the next day, depending on the priority of the call.
yeah, yeah.
And so it is alternative responses are the way to go. Virgil, let me say this, man. We are going through a new age of policing let me back up. This is what we've done. We have assured our communities that we will respond to every call that comes in. So we have done that. We have set that tone. The most difficult part of this now is pulling back because you've set this tone in community oriented policing, and now we're basically saying now we we've got to go a different way. That's also some of the pushback that we're getting. So everybody has to be on the same page. We have to educate our communities on why we're not responding to these type of calls and why there's alternatives responses to these type of calls. And but let me say this, and to the listeners, if somebody would ask, please chime in and answer this question: why do you think that police officers respond to all accidents in some cities? Why they respond to every accident? And we'll give you a few minutes to send your response in. But we'll come back to that. But why do you believe? Just why do you believe? Whether you know or you're familiar with it or not, why do you believe that police officers are expected to, in certain jurisdictions, are mandated to go to every traffic accident when it comes to fender benders? And I'm talking non-fatal, non-injury accidents, just property damage.
Yeah. And Keith, as you mentioned, that a lot of people have just got used to having a police officer respond to a car accident or respond to, say, you may have locked your keys in your car and, something that doesn't really require a police officer. You've seen police officers respond to those calls, but now there has to be some other type of alternative because you've got agencies who don't have the manpower, and you have the agencies that do have the manpower. They're helping those neighboring agencies to deal with their call volumes. So there's a lot that police administrators, police supervisors are dealing with, but it starts with the first call that comes into that 911 dispatcher, how they route that call and how they're able to not solve the call, but make sure that that citizen gets the type of service that they are needing. And so, you got people who are calling on homeless people, because, oh, hey, this homeless person is begging for money. That's not necessarily a uniformed police officer doesn't need to respond to that. And, you ask, if there are people who are our listeners are listening, do you think that police officers should respond to homeless calls? Because as we've seen, a lot of time those calls turn into deadly encounters between police and a homeless person.
I think it's all about the information that's provided, man. I think that's what goes back to what I said earlier. You have to be able to answer the correct questions and on the front end, and that's why I said you don't really want that responsibility put back on those communications professionals, whether they make that decision. But to the listeners, a lot of times, even the caller, I've seen some of the best dispatchers ask the right questions, and the caller is so vague that the dispatcher has no choice but to send the emergency responses out there. And then when and that means police, fire, ambulance, and then when they get there, it's nothing. But it's I don't know how to solve that. I don't think we'll ever solve that. To the question earlier, Pam says, I didn't think they responded to all accidents. And then, which part I never understood. The Melanin Queen says, which part I never understood because they weren't physically there to witness it. So to Pam's question, not every police department does this, but there are still police departments that respond to every accident. Little Rock was one. They respond to every accident. And the reason why this occurs is because the insurance companies have a lot of lobbyists in these states. And so what happens is that you don't do that accident. Now the insurance companies have to do a lot of digging, and it comes down to, he said, she said, which really and truly, to answer the Melanin Queen's question, is because although police officers don't witness the accident, we are trained accident investigators, and what we're doing is putting our opinion. So we're not, unless we actually see the accident, when we get there based on the damage, we're putting our opinion based on what the witnesses may have said, the two individuals involved, based on the damage of the accident. Our opinion, if you look at those accident reports, it does say the officer's opinion of what occurred. It still doesn't mean, it still can go, it's still up to the insurance companies to make that decision. But there are police departments that respond to every call based on the fact that the lobbyists for the insurance company said, we want an accident report.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Keith, I want to remind those who are just now tuning into the podcast show, our tonight's topic is, alternative responses to nonviolent 911 calls. And Keith, I got a video I want to show that addresses officers responding to nonviolent calls.
An Albuquerque police officer charged with using excessive force in an incident involving a disabled man. It happened at the Target on Coors in August of last year when a man buying a bike was dragged from the store by officers. Officer Kenneth Skeens has since been fired from APD. News 13's Natalie Wattis joins us with the video.
Former APD officer Kenneth Skeens is now facing 4 charges, including false imprisonment and battery, after lapel video shows police pull the victim by his arms out of the store.
On August 19, 2022, 3 Albuquerque Police Department officers approach a man at a self-checkout counter at the Target on Coors, struggling to check out. The Attorney General's office identifying the man as having disabilities.
Hi, sir, have a ticket, please. Go ahead and grab all your money. Let's walk out, okay?
The man continues to try to check out as APD officer Kenneth Skeens tells him he's being detained.
Put your money down. You're coming with us, okay? Just put your money down, okay? You're coming with us, okay?
The man tries to explain.
It took me a while.
Pick your money up. You're coming with us now, okay?
It just took me a little while.
Gotcha. You took too long. Go ahead and pick your money up.
The man apologizing.
Take your money up. You're coming. Do you want us to walk you out, or you want to walk yourself out?
The police grabbing the bike the man seems to be purchasing.
Can I please just pay for
So we're gonna grab the money for you, then, okay?
Skeens can be heard in the video telling the man he's going to be issued a criminal trespass that says he can't come back to the business anymore. The man still trying to explain.
I was just getting my money out because I don't want to lose it.
So here's your money.
I keep
Put
it
it in your
tight.
pouch.
Yeah,
Put it up, and let's walk out, okay? You go up the door.
He starts to yell, "I'm calling 911." Then police grab him.
We're walking out.
He struggles against the officers, falling to his knees at one point. They sit him down outside. He doesn't believe they're actually cops.
You're not police.
Yes, we are. We're Albuquerque Police
No, you're
Department.
not. You're security.
Skeens asks him his name again, and when he doesn't give it,
Say, just go ahead and put him in handcuffs, because he's refusing to identify himself.
the man still trying to talk to 911 as he's put into handcuffs.
They won't let me talk to you.
The man still confused as he kneels in cuffs.
See our badges?
No,
Remember when I told you I was with the police department? You have to
I
identify
didn't
yourself.
see your badges.
That's his car. They're on our uniforms, okay? That's your own fault. So now you're going to be charged, okay, with concealing identity, resisting officers, okay?
That former officer you heard in the video was also one of 3 officers involved in the fatal shooting of Keyshawn Thomas at a gas station that same month in August of 2022. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Natalie. In May, APD told News 13 Skeens had been terminated for an incident unrelated to that shooting.
You know, Keith, that how did this all start? Obviously, Target called 911. Here's a man who is trying to pay for a bicycle. Obviously, a store associate or somebody should have been able to help this man with his transaction because, if he's trying to pay cash for it, that's a lot of money to put into the cash dispenser at the register. To me, that's where things should have, it started there and it should have stopped there. But then when the police officers got there, they should have had enough sense to tell Target, this is not a criminal matter. You all handle it. Or they should have went step further, assisted this man with putting the money into the cash register, helping him on his way where it didn't lead to the arrest. And now you got an officer charged with this man's arrest. But one of the interesting things about that one officer was that he was the same officer who was involved in a previous death of a young black man there in Albuquerque. And so we talk about the patterns of these officers' behavior, but there again, Keith, a nonviolent 911 call that should have been handled totally different.
Virgil, let me say this, knowing Target's philosophy on firsthand, an employee, unless it's a life or death situation, a team member is not allowed to contact law enforcement. They have to go through various changes. There's a checkoff list to determine if it rises to the level of police. Then there has to be a supervision, another person who contacts based on that information. But team members, unless it's a life or death situation, are not allowed to call 911. So that in itself, I'd like to know who called 911. That officer could have been there. They could have already been on scene. The other thing is, I know that a lot of the self-service areas do not accept cash. Let me bet, where am I going with this? I think a lot of that fell on those team members. That's where the breakdown was. But at the end of the day, that was a civil issue. That was a customer service issue that we did not see at any point. We did not see this gentleman become combative. We did not see this gentleman. This gentleman has some form of a disability. It seems it could be, and I don't want to guess, possibly cerebral palsy. Just, based on this, on his behavior, and based on the fact he was rather calm. And I mean, it did not appear there was a reason to trespass this gentleman. He was trying to pay. He never tried to walk out with anything. He never tried to conceal it.
Correct.
It got down to frustration on that officer's part. But you have to look at, why were those officers there? Who called those officers? Now, we don't know what happened leading up to that. We don't know if there was something, but based on what we saw, it definitely did not justify police response. It definitely did not justify a use of force. And so, yes, there should have been discipline, but as you said earlier, he was trying to, this guy had a history of this, involved in a deadly force situation, which I've been involved in one, but there's a continuing pattern here of other things. But he lost it.
Yeah.
When you look at the situation, he lost it. Based on what we saw on video, he lost it. He was emotionally hijacked. It was a POP situation, pissed off the police, and he got upset and putting the man on the ground and things like that. That's going to cost. I think that's going to cost both entities big time.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to a comment in the chat room from Veronica. So Veronica, I'm gonna read her comment and then ask Veronica a question. So, and Keith, you can kind of maybe read this as well. Terminated for an incident unrelated to the incident in the video. Sounds like they're trying to reduce liability. When an attorney found out he had some other questionable incidents that should have been investigated and dealt with. So I don't know, Veronica, are you siding with the officer?
No, not at all. No, Veronica, she's not. What Veronica's basically saying is that he was already terminated for an unrelated incident, but it sounds like they were trying to reduce their liability.
Well, he hadn't been terminated.
Say it again.
When this incident, so he was terminated after this incident,
right?
But she says,
yeah, she's not. No, knowing Veronica, no, she's not. If that was the case, she's going to state that. But basically, what she's saying is they were cutting their liability based for. And Veronica, I'm not trying to speak for you, but this is what I perceive that you're saying, is trying to cut their liabilities before because this was a pattern. And we don't even know what was in this officer's history. So there could have been something else. It may not have been, but these 3 incidents may have been risen to the point they were so egregious that they felt that they need to cut ties with them. And so, I mean, when you get to this point of we talk about customer service, and you got to understand too, going back to the show that we had the other week, Albuquerque's under a consent decree. And the majority, then the reason they're under consent decree was based on the history of the use of force, up to deadly force. So they're under the consent decree. Could that have paid I don't know. But she brings up a good point. It's about liability.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Keith, you mentioned a word that we talked about even last week on the podcast show, and many other times before. That key word is customer service. There are some police officers who do a good job related to customer service, and there's a lot who don't, because they don't feel that is a part of their role. And so you've seen police officers who do some of the most kindest things, whether it's helping a senior citizen who is having a problem, moving about or going wherever they need to go, or just having empathy and being there to help either a senior citizen or a mom who is struggling, or even somebody with mental health illness, because that's just how they are. But in this situation, Keith, it just goes back to, as the topic that we're talking about tonight, is the alternative responses to nonviolent calls, and clearly that was a nonviolent call. But there again, you had 3 police officers who could have changed the direction of what was going on there, but they chose not to. And the fact, Keith, you can clearly tell that the gentleman had some physical limitations, and why not just try to help him? But you made a comment about some of these registers don't take cash, some take cards, some don't take cash. And there again, I think you mentioned knowing some of the store policies with Target, that maybe certain associates can't do certain things. But even there again, Keith,
they can push them over to the full service registers.
Or they could say, "Hey, yeah, we will help you," because there again,
absolutely,
the somebody in that store called to have a police respond because it seemed like maybe he was just taking too long, and maybe they could have thought maybe the guy was under the influence of alcohol or drugs or something. But there again, Keith, this is why people are also talking about police reforms and having these co-responses or other alternative, because as we've seen with other situations, things could turn deadly for a person who did not deserve to die. And I think that is the main thing of how you're looking at these alternative responses and other co-responses, whether it's mental health or just something as simple as a situation like this.
But that's where it comes out to. You got to ask all the right questions and to determine. But a lot of times, I've said this, we're kind of like, some officers are kind of like those pit bulls that once they latch on, you know what, I'm gonna back up.
They don't know how to
back up. They are like alligators, because I've had a pit bull and they're some of the sweetest dogs, but an alligator, where they latch on and they won't let go, and they're gonna keep that grip until they get a solution that they believe that meets their need to come out to the call. But there are so many different alternate responses that could be provided. I mean, like I said, we're already doing it, so we can't say that it doesn't work, because there's so many different. We don't need to go to minor fender benders unless there's a serious altercation. We don't need to go to property crimes that the suspect's not on scene, because those police service assistants, they have the technology. They can lift the fingerprints and things like that. We don't do a good job educating, because what's happened is we are a society that bases our opinion and base our needs on what we see on TV. So when there is that vehicle burglary where there's no suspect and there's no evidence, we believe that you come out, you take fingerprints, the crime is solved right there. We have to educate our community that that's a situation that a third-party person, a non-commissioned officer or non-commissioned personnel can come out and they can take that in the same, it gets the same results. Either there is evidence or there's not, but somebody's going to take your report, or call and we can do the report online. It's going to be the same result, where somebody's going to get the case, they're going to investigate it. Yeah. So we have to do a better job of that, because police services sometimes do get abused based on the fact that we just don't know how to say no.
Yeah. Well, Keith, and also to throw this into the mix of it, you've got some communities who are pretty high-end communities who are pretty wealthy, and they expect that they're paying their tax dollars. And if they want a police officer to come to their home because somebody stole a bicycle, they're going to demand that the police officer come because they know somebody. They know the mayor or city manager, or they know that somebody who they can call, and they can, because they got the money. And so
you can't fight
versus
that. You can't fight that, man. That's going to be one you're going to go.
Yeah. So you got people who I use the word privilege, who feel like, hey, I live in this gated community, or I live in this $1 million housing addition, so I want a police officer to come out here because if on a non-violent call. So Keith, this next video we're going to watch with our listeners is from Charlotte, how they are responding to non-emergency 911 calls. And I think this here has a little bit of some of the things we've been talking about, and also, Keith, the cost factor that agencies are looking at versus sending uniform officers versus sending another alternative response.
To an exclusive Defenders investigation finding CMPD officers are frequently tied up on non-emergency calls instead of fighting crime. It's shedding light on a national debate over how police departments should operate. Our team reviewed CMPD data and found officers are spending hundreds of hours on noise complaints, found property, and minor accidents. Community leaders say a different police model would free up officers for more serious crimes and could be a cost-saving measure for taxpayers. That's got Defender Alex Shabbat asking, where's the money?
Well, you may be wondering, if police don't handle those calls, who will? Well, one of the options is already at CMPD, and chances are you've never heard of them. The clock starts after a 911 call comes in.
Do you need police, fire, or medic?
Police on scene, 94 minutes for an abandoned vehicle.
I have a new car sitting in the middle of the cemetery.
Almost 2.5 hours for a noise complaint.
I called the manager for the apartment. He says you have to call the police.
More than 8 hours, a full workday for found property when people discover something out of place or suspicious.
Somebody threw a bag behind my yard.
But none of those calls resulted in an arrest or even a criminal investigation.
I wish I could officers out there as soon as we can.
It's just a snapshot of the long list of non-emergencies tying up police in Charlotte. We analyzed CMPD data from a single week and found officers spent nearly 450 hours for the lowest priority calls. That's the equivalent of 11 officers working 40-hour weeks with no breaks.
That's just not in taxpayers' best interest, and it ties up the police.
Our investigation comes as cities around the country are reviewing police responsibilities in light of civil unrest. Robert Dawkins with the advocacy group Action NC says Charlotte can do better.
This data that you've got is going to go a long way to helping us show that.
The issue of police reform highlighted in a new report by the United States Conference of Mayors. It says cities should be asking themselves several questions, including how often police are called for property offenses.
Drove the car up in my driveway, tore down a fence.
During the 1-week period we analyzed, we found CMPD officers spent the most time on traffic accidents and hit and runs without injuries. That was followed by noise complaints, found property, and vandalism.
I'm all in favor of looking at that.
City Councilman Malcolm Graham says he'd like the city to consider other policing models for the future, which could free up officers to handle violent crime.
Charlotte has over 100 homicides this year, so we need our officers kind of really trying to be proactive.
According to this U.S. Mayor's report, cities should analyze calls for service to determine who should be the responder in different circumstances.
I think that we could find someone else to respond to them.
In Charlotte, CMPD says they already have 18 non-police employees called investigative technicians who take a wide variety of incident reports by phone.
There's something already in place. Let's see if we can add to it and enhance it.
It also could be a potential cost savings for taxpayers. The base salary for a CMPD officer is about $45,000 per year, compared to $41,000 for an investigative technician.
We can find cheaper, more effective ways of responding to the needs of the community.
It comes as the City Council is moving forward with plans for an independent assessment of the issue. In a statement, CMPD says in part, they are eager to participate in the assessment to ensure the department is serving our community as effectively as possible.
Not defunded, but reallocated.
If city leaders agree with him about non-emergency calls,
They were involved in a parking lot accident.
it's possible the days of police responding to those could be numbered. While I was working on this story, I was wondering what rank-and-file police officers thought about all this, so I reached out to the Fraternal Order of Police, but they declined to comment for the story. In Charlotte, Alex Shabbat, WCNC Charlotte.
And if you have a story you want the Defenders to look into, email them at defenders@wcnc.com.
An Albuquerque police officer charged with using.
You know, Keith, it was interesting that the reporter stated that they reached out to the FOP and the FOP didn't have a response. I want to ask you, you want to know why?
Oh, I know why. And the reason why, they believe that those 18 positions are cutting into police bodies. They believe that that's taking jobs away from commission officers.
Yeah. And instead of looking at a much more efficient way of policing, especially when you look at the number of hours that just that investigative reporter determined that officers were spending on nonviolent calls, I guess it came out to 11 officers in a 40-hour work week. That would have took that many officers to deal with those type of calls. So again, Keith, it's the culture of policing needs to change. You're looking at, you've got a lot of city leaders who are asking police executives, are there alternative ways that we can police our community that is, it's not saying that you're going to be soft on crime, but if it's, I'm gonna go back to, a shoplifting at a CVS or Target or whatever. Those stores have the ability to, with loss prevention, but once that person gets outside of that store, there's nothing that store can really do. And so you ask yourself that question, what are police officers supposed to do? And remember, Keith, last week on our podcast, we talked about an incident in California where deputies are under investigation for throwing down an elderly Black female from a Winco store behind some type of disturbance there. Non-violent, but it turned violent outside of that store.
Well, even if they do, when you look at top calls for services in any city, the locations are going to be, statistically, are going to be hospitals, the police departments, and Walmart. And the reason police departments is because a lot of people actually go there to make a report, and that's the offense location that you have at that time. And you go back later and you update it. But those are the top 3 call locations in a lot of cities. You're absolutely right. A lot of these situations, people aren't going to stop. A lot of these situations, you're never going to know who that person is to make the report. I'm a firm believer that you don't respond or call for officers, especially in retail, unless you have a person in custody or detained for an officer to come out there and get information. There are others that you can do the investigation and provide to the departments later, but to call officer out because somebody walked out with something, there's no threat. Now, if there's a threat to bodily harm, absolutely, that's an exigent circumstance. But there's a lot of these, there's no threat. It's basically, we just want police out front. And I've had them tell me this when I was a patrol officer and a patrol supervisor. We call because we know when that police car is out there, then there's a probability that it's going to minimize people from stealing, at least for that 30 minutes that police car is there. But that's kind of abusive when you think about it, because you're talking about property. And we're not talking about life or death situations. And so I totally agree. Those are situations, if you're going to make it, I know a lot of times it needs to be where you tell them that we're not going to come out. You need to make that report online. And so I know at one point when I was working in Arlington, we would take a stack of incident reports or non-emergency reports out to these local retailers. And then what they would do when these incidents occur, they would fill out the report, and then we would go back later and pick those reports up. So it prevented us to continue going out there day by day. I mean, that in itself happens, but we just have to start telling our citizens we can't. There's nothing we can do. Situations are you can make that report over the phone.
Over the phone, or go online and
Go
do
online
it.
and do it. Or there's nothing to it. There's not a criminal offense for somebody throwing a purse. I mean, somebody found a purse in their driveway. Well, they opened and looked through it. There's nothing there. I mean, why should we go out there? The police department shouldn't go out there. And now, if it's ID or something like that, but there's nothing in the purse, it's, unless it tracks back to some type of crime as evidence, but we get those type of calls.
Yeah. And Keith, and I think that's where you have a, whether it be a community service officer or some other type of not a sworn officer, but somebody who may be in a uniform, but they're not a fully commissioned officer, who are responding to, found property, whether it be at a home or whether it be, we saw in that video clip where it could be a backpack that somebody left behind. And now if you see a backpack, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have a whole block blocked off, and you're going to have SWAT called out there. And for the bomb squad and all that. And so now after 5 or 6 hours, they blow up the backpack and determine, didn't have any explosive device in it. But look at the manpower and the time that agencies spent on dealing with that. And I think
that's a slippery slope.
It is.
You don't know. I remember being on one of those calls, and it was looked like a pipe bomb that someone had discarded on a curb. And, I had officers, I know that's not, no. Man, there's wires coming from this thing. And the bomb squad came out. It was fake. But in that situation, you had to do the evacuations. You had to block off the street. But it looked like a legitimate pipe bomb. And so you don't want officers taking those chances. You don't want citizens. So you have to do that. But, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Certain calls are slippery slope. Spoofing calls. You can't say you're not going on a call that appears to be a spoofing call where somebody's playing a joke and there's really not an incident. You can't afford to say, as a police chief, we're going all those, because who knows when it's
who knows when it's real. Well, and Keith, and I think this is where agencies like Chula Vista and other agencies who are using technology with their drone units to fly a drone in, determine there's live video feed of what that device looks like, or what that backpack looks like, or what that car, if there's anybody in that car. Now they're able to make a better judgment on what is the next step. Are they going to send out the bomb squad? Are they going to block off this whole block for the next couple of hours? So again, that's another alternative response to dealing with some of these situations. So, Keith, and I think, as we talk about, alternative responses to nonviolent 911 calls, and to those who are listening, do you think that this is something that if you call the police, are you expecting the police to show up to your home because you went outside and here's a couple of bicycles in your driveway and you don't know who they belong to? Do you feel you should call the police, or do you feel that you should just let the bike sit out there and it's none of your business? I mean,
I think when it's on your property, you can do whatever you want to with it. Unless you find some form of evidence that they could have been involved in a crime, like you find blood on it, or you find some other, form of evidence. But I think when you have those type of situations, I think when it's on your property, you have that right to do with whatever you want to, whether it's destroy it, whether it's, whatever. You can even bring those items down to the police department. A lot of people don't realize that you can bring those bikes down to the property room. Officer doesn't have to come out there. So if you don't want to deal with it, you can just put it in your car, truck, whatever, take it down, and they can process it that way. But I think that that's a situation where you don't need. But like I said, we tell people, Virgil, it's a very, like I said, slippery slope, because we tell people that let us make a decision on what's suspicious and what's
or not suspicious. Yeah.
But in that situation, I mean, some of it is just, I don't think. You do have individuals that say, "I'm not going to call. I don't want to tie you up." On, you do have those.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Keith, and you just made a comment. Do you think that we have contributed to this problem, just with the, how policing has always been, is that, hey, if you see something suspicious, you call the police. But how could we educate our public better about when to call and when not to call police on what's something that is a non-violent call?
Well, Virgil, we have social media platforms, and we can do a lot of feeds and a lot of videos showing and expressing, like the one we just saw from Charlotte Mecklenburg. That's very informative. And I think there's a way to design a video to explain that this is what happens. This is what you need to call. This is what you don't have to call. This is an emergency. This is not. Doesn't require police response. I think there's ways of doing that. But I will tell you, the thing that's going to drive the message through, Virgil, is it's going to take the local government officials because what happens is that we can say that it's police chief. Yeah, we can say that it's police chiefs, right? Yeah. But if that citizen who doesn't like what we said calls that elected official is going to probably be on the side of their constituents.
Yeah.
And so you got to look at that too. So we can make these decisions and we can write these policies and things, but it doesn't mean that we're still not going to get pushback from those who represent the community.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Keith, and again, you get the politics involved in it, and that just kind of, makes the situation a lot difficult. So, yeah. So, hey, man, I want to remind those who are just now tuning into the podcast show, tonight's topic is alternative responses to nonviolent 911 calls. In the wake of so many police departments who are looking at police reforms and whether these alternative responses are related to mental health calls, or some of these alternative responses are related to, as we talked about, injury accidents, property crimes. There again, Keith, I think it's just a lot of education behind how we communicate that information to our citizens. Because again, you mentioned you have a lot of people who they don't want to call 911 because they know, hey, it's not worth the time of the officer to come out. But then you got those who are very insistent. And, Keith, we have an older population who are elderly. And so they're expecting for an officer to come out because they may have went out and found something in their yard. And so those are situations where obviously the dispatcher is going to send that officer to that call because there's information that they found out that this is maybe a 80 or 90-year-old person. And to do the best thing is just to send that officer out there because that citizen is being pretty persistent about it.
I'm going to tell you a story real quick and to the listeners. I remember being an officer, actually being a supervisor. We get a call at 2:00 in the morning from an elderly lady who basically said that her toilet was running. It was overflowing. And so, I came from an agency that said we will provide service. And we went out there and it was a minor adjustment. But I felt we didn't have, that in itself, because we had said we're not coming out. But you're talking an elderly person who lived by herself, who needed help. You just can't say no to those type of calls.
Yeah.
You can't. And I remember, this is stressful for this lady. She lives by herself. She's elderly. Her toilet wouldn't stop. And like I said, it was just a minor adjustment inside the tank. But it's just those are the type of things that, it makes this decision very difficult because we could have easily said, we're not coming out there. That's a
plumber
issue. Yeah. Sometimes you can't do that. And so I think it's a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Well, and it just goes back to the video that we saw, Keith, the incident at Target. Here you walk into the store, you see a man who is struggling to pay for a bicycle. He's got the money to pay for it. It's not like he's trying not to pay for it, but here he has a bunch of 5s, 1s, and 20s or whatever. Help him out. And again, there's a lot of kindness that comes along with dealing with people. We've got another comment in the chat room from Rick. Yeah. He says, how does an agency strategically reallocate traditional police services to non-police entities without damaging the perception of the level of customer service your customer base is used to from their police?
That's a really good question, Rick. And it's, the key word there, I like what you said, strategically. And what we did was we when I was in Norman, we started keeping numbers regarding to those type of incidents and what that cost. So it cost an officer this much to hire an officer, and this is what per call it costs an officer. This is the hourly rate it costs an officer when they go on these type of calls. And that, these are services that prevent when we go out to those type of calls, then we're not able to be proactive in areas that have high traffic or high crime. And so I think things like that strategic.
Well, and that's what Charlotte Middleburg did.
Yeah. And so being able to provide that information strategically, being able to provide that information, it doesn't mean that you're still not going to get pushback, but it's a little bit of the time. You don't automatically say we're not going to respond to that. It takes that strategic planning, explaining, and showing people where the benefit of not responding to this alarm call when this person's had 55 alarm calls at this location. They don't have an alarm permit. And so you have to explain that to them. So it's strategically, I'm glad you said that. It's a very fine line that we walk when we decide to make those changes.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, brother, man, we're coming up on the last few seconds of the podcast show, man. I want to thank everybody who tuned in for another informative topic tonight. And, those who are listening on LinkedIn, to Rick and to Henry, my Hobbs Eagle connection tuned in on the podcast show. So, brother, again, this is what makes You and the Law podcast, is the informative topics that we come up with.
The informative topics that I decide we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
No, it's a team effort. It's a team effort, man. It's a team effort put together with us and our producer. So.
Yeah, well, and hopefully those who are listening to the show and those who will find us on the social media platforms, who are listening to podcasts, that they find that our show brings a lot of informative information to you and in your community, and we're going to continue to bring these type of topics and talk about things that are important to our listeners, and we have a connection to that, Keith.
So Virgil, tell everybody where they can watch, and then give the listeners that good news that you provided me with the other day.
Well, Keith, we are on a lot of social media platforms. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music Podcasts. Man, everywhere. We're on our YouTube channel, You and the Law on YouTube. And of course, you can always find our rebroadcast shows on our Facebook page. But our podcast show was just added to another platform, a podcast platform called FM. What I can't remember the exact name of it, Keith, but it's another. It just goes to show you that our podcast is being picked up by so many other different platforms, and it's because of when they listen to our show, we're pretty consistent with it, and also probably because it has something to do with Chief Swaggy One. So
thank you, Virgil. That's all I wanted to do. That's all you had to say, man.
Was that all I had to say?
All you had to say, bro.
Yeah. So you know what? I'm going to find this because I sent it to you the other day, as to when I told you that I just been notified that we were our podcast show had been picked up on another podcast platform. But again, all of this here is due to those who are listening to the podcast and who continue to support us. And we're working on having some guests on our podcast show. We've got a guest that we're working on from the Alaska State Police, brother April, who we're trying to get on the podcast. We're working with Art Burton out of Chicago to get him and the Bass Reeves, the guy who portrays Bass Reeves. That's going to be a good podcast because there's a movie coming out about Bass Reeves here in the near future.
Yeah, that's going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to it. Rick asked, what
happened to your Shaggy Shade?
Actually, man, they're getting repaired, man. So I'm hoping in a week or two they'll be back, man. So I appreciate it, man.
Well, Rick, you know what? He thinks he's got the swag, man. So we're gonna let him roll with that.
Go ahead, Virgil. I got so much I can say about that. I appreciate you, Rick. Appreciate everybody.
All right. Well, hey, we want to remind you, everybody, to make sure you tune in next week for another informative topic on You and the Law podcast show. And again, thanks for tuning in to the podcast. And Swaggy One, man, we will get together again and do this next Thursday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on You and the Law podcast show.
All right, my brother. Peace.
Get your hands up, yeah. To the floor, yeah.
Don Selector.